I want to talk to you about the role that you and I have to play together to build a foundation for health for our country, a foundation that will support people in communities across this country, not just a select few. There are two big things that I learned over these last 10 months, things that emphasize the lessons I learned as a clinician caring for patients when I was in Boston. The first is that we are facing an overwhelming burden of disease, but much of it is preventable. That last part is key. As many of you know, nearly 50% of adults in America suffer from a chronic disease like diabetes or heart disease or cancer. Chronic diseases are responsible for 7 out of every 10 deaths. They cost us over $1 trillion a year in healthcare costs. But the key, again, is that many of these are preventable. I had a patient who I often think of, who I cared for during my time in Boston, a young woman who was in her early 30s, who developed obesity at a young age, in her teens, who developed diabetes shortly after. And after a few years of having diabetes, started noticing that she was getting these infections on her foot. Infections, as many of you know, are a common and unfortunate complication of diabetes. But initially, the infections were simple to treat. Just oral antibiotics took care of them. But then the infections started getting more and more complicated. They eventually required intravenous antibiotics, and she had to come into the hospital. The bacteria became more and more resistant, and she started requiring more powerful or broad-spectrum antibiotics. And by the time I met her in the hospital, she had been to the intensive care unit because the bacteria that she was infected with was so resistant that despite antibiotics, it had spread through her bloodstream and nearly killed her. Now, she made it through. She turned the corner. But when I saw her on the floors, it was clear to me that she wasn't just dealing with a simple infection. She was dealing with a lifetime of chronic illness that as a young person had changed how she thought about herself, and that had been really challenging to manage. People had told her, you should eat better. You should go out and walk after dinner. That'll help you lose weight and stay in shape. What many of them didn't realize was that affordable, nutritious food was beyond her means. And they also didn't realize that going for a walk after dinner in her neighborhood meant putting yourself at risk for being shot or mugged. That was a choice she wasn't willing to make. Many people in America, whether young or old, are suffering from chronic illnesses that are preventable. And the question that stands before us is, can technology help us become a nation that's as good at preventing illness as we are at treating it? We live in a nation that invests incredible amounts of time, money, and resources in treating illnesses. And for that reason, we have some of the greatest treatments in the world. But imagine if that investment in treatment were matched by an investment in prevention. Imagine how much better off we would be as a country. The second lesson that I learned on the road that I want to share with you is that one of the greatest challenges I see facing our country right now is that people have lost faith in their ability to control their health. More and more people believe that their health is in the hands of the food industry, the government, large hospitals, their doctor, or others. Less and less do they feel that the decisions that they make in their own lives can have a meaningful impact on whether or not they're healthy. That lack of agency, that sense of disempowerment is deep, and it's very concerning to me. And the question that I think about today, standing before all of you, is can technology help restore a sense of agency to people who have lost their sense of power when it comes to health? I think this is critical, because without a sense of engagement, without people feeling like they have the power to improve their own health, then we're not going to ultimately be able to create a healthier country and a healthier world. So the question is, how are we going to solve these problems? Well, I firmly believe that to solve these, we have to create a culture of prevention in America, a culture that's deeply rooted in 3 key pillars: good nutrition, active living, and emotional well-being. We also have to create a culture where people feel empowered to make the right choices. This, I believe, is what's going to help us solve the healthcare challenges we face today. And I want to talk about these three pillars briefly. Nutrition is a critical risk factor for chronic disease, diabetes, obesity, heart disease, and many others. The question is, how do we enable people to participate, to incorporate nutritious diets into their lives where they eat more fruits and vegetables and consume more water while also reducing how much sodium they consume and how much sugar they consume as well? Now, this isn't easy because if you look around you in your day-to-day lives, all of us know that we are often surrounded by unhealthy choices. We're lured by the donuts offered at work. We're sort of compelled to choose sometimes sugary beverages if it's the only thing that's available in the vending machine when you're working late at night at work. So to make nutritious choices available, we both have to help educate people about what those choices are, but make them more available. Some months ago, when I began my tenure as Surgeon General, I spent some time in Roanoke, Virginia. This is part of a listening tour that I began my tenure with, where I visited towns and cities across the country to hear firsthand from people what the challenges were that they were dealing with. And in Roanoke, Virginia, what I also learned about were some of the innovations taking place on the ground. I encountered a group of individuals who were running a Healthy Chefs program, where the community had realized that many people needed help when it came to nutrition, but they also realized that many kids and adults didn't even know what good nutrition was. Many of them couldn't even identify fruits and vegetables that you might take for granted that folks know. So in this Healthy Chefs program that they built, they taught kids in school what fruits and vegetables were. They actually helped them identify them. They enabled them to taste them. And then they went to the third step, which is to actually work with the kids to make something, make a dish with those fruits and vegetables. And at the beginning of the program, they asked the kids what their top 3 favorite foods were. And you might be able to guess what those top 3 were, but they included pizza, hot dogs, and macaroni and cheese. And then they asked the kids, though, again at the end of the program, after they had the chance to taste fruits and vegetables, to work with them, to make something that they and the other kids could eat. And what they found very interestingly is that the list started changing. Now, the big 3 hadn't disappeared altogether, but in many cases, 1 or 2 of those items were replaced by things that the kids had actually tasted. And then the kids went home, and they actually they asked their parents for these dishes. The parents weren't sure what they were or how to get them, so the school was prepared then to teach the parents too. And through that, the Healthy Chefs program is helping kids and adults in Roanoke, Virginia, engage more with good nutrition. In addition to nutrition, physical activity is incredibly important, and it's a powerful and much overlooked tool for improving health. Sometimes we're used to thinking that complex problems require expensive and complex solutions, but that's not always the case. Just a few weeks ago, from my office, we released our call to action on walking and walkable communities, drawing attention to the fact that something that we have been doing for millennia, walking, it turns out it's one of the most powerful tools we can use to reduce our risk of heart disease and diabetes. In fact, just 22 minutes on average a day of brisk walking can reduce your risk of heart disease and diabetes. And if you do even more, it can start to reduce your risk of certain cancers as well. This is all with the power of just walking. The third pillar is around emotional well-being. Everywhere I go, regardless of where it is in the country, I hear about how stressed people are, about how folks who are older are worried about how they're going to care for their health, about how young parents are concerned about how they're going to create a foundation for a healthy life for their kids. And I hear from kids who are stressed out about the lives that they lead, not just because of what's happening in their schools, but because of the challenges they sometimes face in their neighborhoods with violence and with bullying and with other challenges that we hear and read about each day on the news. Emotional well-being is not just the absence of stress. So often we're led to think that our degree of happiness and fulfillment is dependent on the external environment. We're led to believe that we are the victims, in a sense, of circumstance. But that's not entirely true, because actually what science tells us is that there are concrete, measurable things that we can do to improve our emotional well-being, to improve our sense of happiness and fulfillment. And this, in turn, can have a positive impact on our health. Things as simple as gratitude exercises or short meditations have been shown now increasingly to have an impact on how much people exercise and on their physical symptoms in the case of gratitude exercises, and on school performance, on behavioral disturbances, and on graduation rates in the case of meditation for kids. So emotional well-being is important. It's an investment worth making, and it's an area where we can proactively improve. These three pillars are what I believe are the cultures of prevention that we need to build in America. The question is this really achievable? Well, if you have any doubts on that, I would encourage you to look around the world at places like Okinawa, Japan, at Sardinia, Italy, at Ikaria in Greece, and at other places around the country where people live longer and have a higher functional status, both physically and mentally, than we do on average here in America. And they achieve that by building this culture of prevention. The fact that they can do it means that we can do it as well. And the question is, how are we going to do it? So to that end, I want to share a couple of key challenges that I hope you can consider as you think about how to employ technology to improve health and the well-being of our country. The first challenge is around making healthy choices easier. We know that information isn't always enough. The challenge is how to enable people to use information to make choices around activity, around nutrition, and around the behaviors and environmental elements that impact their emotional well-being. And the question is, can technology be used to make healthy choices more accessible and more compelling? There's this myth that has propagated for years in our culture that when it comes to food, that we have to choose between things that are healthy and things that are tasty. But that's not the case. That's a false choice. There are healthy and tasty options out there, but they're not always within people's reach. This is a problem I think technology can help solve. The second challenge is around eliminating disparities in health. We know that too often in America today that your zip code is a better determinant of your health than anything else. And that shouldn't be the case. We want to be a country where everybody has a fair shot at good health. The question is, can technology enable us to identify those who are at highest risk of illness and also provide them with the tools and the access to healthy choices? The third challenge I would put before you is how do we make health and the pursuit of health a team sport? Any of you who have tried to change your diet or have tried to go on a new exercise regimen know that health is not a solo journey, that it's not easy to do just on our own, but we have to help each other, we have to motivate each other. And that's why community can be such a powerful tool when it comes to improving our health. But the challenge that we face now is too many people are on their own. And the question then before us is, can technology enable people to support each other in changing their lives for the better? And the fourth challenge that I'd like to put before you is around combating social isolation. When I was training up at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston years ago, I had a clinic where I would see patients in an outpatient setting. It was a wonderful, wonderful experience. And people would often ask me, what was the most common diagnosis that you saw? What was the most common problem that you heard about? And you know what? It wasn't diabetes. It wasn't heart disease. It wasn't cancer. It was actually isolation. Most of the people that I encountered in my clinic felt alone. They felt they were struggling alone, both in the pursuit of better health and in everything else in their life. And we know that the lack of social connectedness can have a profound impact on our emotional well-being. And conversely, improving our social connectedness can help improve our emotional well-being, and through that, our health as well. So the question is, can technology be used to improve our social connectedness and combat isolation? In our office, the Surgeon General's office, we're working on these challenges as well. We're working hard to build a culture of prevention. We're doing this in part by modernizing how we communicate, by using new messages, new messengers, as well as new platforms that communicate old and new ideas about health to people who aren't traditionally reached through conventional means. But we're also looking to go beyond disseminating information. to working directly with communities to translate that information into real change, because that's what's needed. That's why when we launched our call to action a few weeks ago, we didn't just put a sheaf of papers out there, but we instead brought healthcare players like Kaiser Permanente together with the NCAA, the National Collegiate Athletic Association, together with the International Council on Shopping Malls, and many other players, recognizing that if we want to build an environment that's conducive to activity and good nutrition, we need everyone to play their part, whether they're employers and innovators or faith leaders and educators. And that's a model that we want to employ in every initiative that we launch. But I'm here to tell you in no uncertain terms that we can't do this work alone, that we need the help of leaders in technology and innovation. We need all of your help. And as somebody who built a technology company in my prior life and who retains a very strong interest in technology, I believe that technology can actually help us tackle so many of the problems in health that we typically see as insurmountable. This is an urgent challenge, the challenge of building a culture of prevention in America. And I will tell you that quite literally, people's lives depend on it. And I meet these folks every day as I'm traveling around the country. I meet young parents who are struggling with how to provide nutritious food for their kids. I meet people who really want to walk and be active, but they're worried about safety in their neighborhoods. And I meet children who are experiencing not only the problems that we see on the outside, whether it be obesity or other challenges, but who are also experiencing challenges on the inside when it comes to their emotional well-being. That's why we have to create and build this culture of prevention in America. I know that we face big challenges, but one thing I want to be absolutely clear about is that the challenges we face are not bigger than our collective will. They are not. And if you doubt this, you only need to look at history and recognize that it was collective will that allowed our country to take on and eradicate smallpox at a time where few people thought it was possible. It was collective will that allowed our country to overcome unspeakable violence and racism and pass the Civil Rights Act in the 1960s. It was also collective will that allowed us as a country 30 years ago to come together and to begin addressing one of the defining problems of that time, HIV and AIDS. Many of you may be familiar with the story of Ryan White. He's a son of Indiana from Kokomo, a young man who lived with hemophilia and contracted HIV through a blood transfusion. He faced incredible discrimination. He faced all kinds of threats and misunderstanding from the people around him, people who he knew, people who he didn't know. But despite all of that, he took it upon himself to help educate those in his community and around the country about HIV. A few weeks ago, I was at the White House celebrating the 25th anniversary of the Ryan White Care Act. And as I sat there and looked out at the lawmakers and staffers who had helped make that law possible, as I talked to Jeannie, Ryan's mother, who is still with us and who remains proud of her son's legacy, I was reminded that what Ryan and Jeannie did is they helped mobilize our collective will. When mobilized, our collective will can do extraordinary things. And this is one of those moments again, one of those defining times where we have to make a decision about what kind of country we want. What kind of country do we want to build with our collective will? I want us to build a nation where every child, regardless of where they're born, has a fair shot at good health. I want us to build a country where the American dream, the dream that brought my parents to Miami, the dream that opened so many doors for me, I want to build a country where the American dream is available to everyone in America, where we create a foundation of health that each and every person in our great country can stand on and reach for their dreams. That's the country that we have to create together. That's the country that you have to help us create through the use of technology and innovation. And what I can tell you is that as your Surgeon General, it will be my privilege to work with you, to learn from you, and to stand with you every step of the way. Thank you so much.